Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Wrestling Conversations. Joining the show today is Adam Riches. Adam, thank you for making time for the show. I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Absolutely. And, you're a guy that's done a lot of things, and this is a wrestling-centric show, but you've done lots of other things that is very cool outside of wrestling, too. So I want to kind of touch on all the different things that you've been up to for years now. But to kind of just begin in keeping it to wrestling, when were you first introduced to wrestling? Has that been like a lifelong fandom for you, or is that something that you picked up on later on? When did wrestling come into play for you?
It's funny. I've kind of tried to figure out like exactly when it was, and I can't tell you like the exact date, but I'm going to say somewhere around April of 1993.
Okay.
Um, I think that I was aware of it before then because how could you not be as a kid? Like the WWF was the biggest thing in the world in the early 90s, so I was definitely aware, and I probably even had like a relative bought me like a puzzle or something, but I don't think I actually started becoming an active watcher until then.
Okay, sure. 93. And that's kind of like a little bit of a down period too. But for me, I was born in 97. So I started watching wrestling probably like 2001. But then when I started to get a little older, to me, I always hold that like, 2002 to 2007 in such high regard, even though that's maybe most people, that's not their favorite time
Yeah.
period. But who were some of your favorite guys growing up that you were really into?
um a huge Sergeant Slaughter fan because of the GI Joe and wrestling crossover. I was a big Ric Flair mark. I mean, I liked. It's funny. A lot of the guys that I was really into as a kid, I don't not like them now, but your interests evolve and change. I mean, I was a big like Shawn and Brett guy, of course, back in the day. Hogan, Warrior, like all the obvious ones. The guy that I really like gravitated to that was like my favorite for a long time was Jeff Hardy, just because when I was like of the right age, he was just like, he's like the cool older brother, like he was like
Oh
everything I
yeah.
aspired to look like and act like, and so, um, but yeah, I mean, I like everybody is the short answer. Like, but those are a few highlights.
Sure. No, and yeah, Jeff Hardy, that was always my guy growing up too. So I like some of his first run. I was a little young, but that's really what captured, I think, wrestling for me is what that's really grabbed a hold. And then he came back in I think it was '06 to WWE at the time. That was pretty special. So Jeff Hardy, that's a pretty good call too. And in the Sergeant Slaughter yeah, that's also I was wondering about that because I'm like, okay, because obviously your connection to GI Joe and everything you've had going on there too, like wow, things really came full circle there for you,
Yeah, big time.
definitely. But all right, and were you into the? And obviously, for people that are watching this through the video version, can see everything behind you, and you are obviously a big figure collector, and obviously you've been working on designing and stuff as well. Were you very much into wrestling figures as a kid?
Huge.
Okay.
Um, Probably as soon as I started watching, I was collecting the Hasbros, and it's funny now, obviously, as adult collectors that have insatiable appetites to get everything the second it comes out, we don't appreciate peg warmers. They're actually a nuisance. But as a kid, that was great because I was going to Blockbuster Video weekly and I was constantly checking out, stuff from maybe the, say, 5 to 10 year window before I was watching. And so when you could still go to retail in 93 and find guys like the Rockers or Texas Tornado or, a Brutus 1 lingering or something at a Walgreens, whatever, like that was great for me because that allowed me to kind of fill in the blanks. But it's also funny because doing that, you'd look at the card backs and then you'd see characters like Andre and Akeem that were long gone from retail, and like there's no internet, so I'm driving myself insane trying to find them, not understanding why I can't. So fond
Yeah,
memories of when I finally did get all those guys.
no, I think it's, and I've talked to other people that I've had on the show before too, of just like it really is just so much a different time now where it's like, okay, everything is so easily accessible. That's current stuff for the most part. Like, yeah, you might have some retail exclusive things that are tough to track down, or there might be some of those, like rare chase figures from AEW or something that's coming out. But for the most part, everything is pretty accessible all the time, at least for a period of time. And there's nothing like walking into a store and being surprised with what's on the pegs. I feel like now it's like, okay, you could order from Ringside or from Amazon or even Walmart's, Targets. You generally kind of know what it's going to be, but the surprise factor is just something that really I do miss that.
Yeah, and I think too, like, not only is it accessible from the standpoint of you can just go on eBay and get anything, but it's accessible from the standpoint that if you're a popular TV character, you're going to have refreshes constantly. So even guys that I would say are lower on the card are still getting multiple figures. But in that era, in that LJN Hasbro era, unless you were the top, like, Macho Hogan level, you might have only gotten one figure for your whole run. And so it's like if you missed Akeem or Andre or whatever, at the beginning of the run, that was it. Like
Mhm.
they never got another figure. And so they became holy grails just by default because there was no way to get them. Like I will never forget,
Mhm.
it was 1997 when I finally found Andre.
Oh
It
wow,
was at a
okay.
comic store that had just opened, and like he was very played with, and I want to say he was $15, which for that time, for a loose figure, felt like a small fortune. But like I can't even explain to you, even then, years removed from the Hasbro. I mean, I was already well into Jax. I was so excited to find that figure because it just felt like I was never gonna. And now, go on eBay and there's 1,000 of them at any given time. But like,
Mhm. Mhm.
you really appreciated things more then.
Oh yeah, definitely too. And it's one of those things I always think about actually just watching wrestling now too, where it's like, okay, there's I mean, not that there wasn't obviously territories up until, but into the '90s, you had your big companies, but it's like really most people grew up on kind of one company, right? I mean, for the most part,
Yeah,
and like now everything there's streaming, there's all like even like indies you can watch, you can keep up with that all on like IWTV or Fight TV. Then you got your big companies still too, and or things on on Peacock or whatever too. But I have fond memories of going into like a video store and checking out. For me, honestly, like my store never got like new tapes, so I checked out. I think it was WrestleMania 12, and I think it was the 2001 Royal Rumble. Those were like the ones that they had
yeah.
for like a good 10-year stretch where it's like they got nothing new. So I checked out each of those tapes about, I don't know, probably 50 times each or maybe more. Just watch the same ones over and over because there wasn't things to go back and watch necessarily all the time, for
Yeah, it's
sure.
funny you
So
say that. There's certain shows that are so burned into my psyche, particularly like Mania 7, 8, and 9. And I didn't actually watch any of those shows live, but I think just from renting them so much and watching them over and over and over, they're probably the most iconic shows in all of wrestling history to me. And they're not the best by any means. I just think I've watched them so many thousands of times that
yeah, they become that special thing, and like I think another one was Royal Rumble '04, where that was one that they owned. And I was kind of a poor kid growing up, so like we didn't get to watch too many, like a pay-per-view every once in a while, because it's like, oh, okay, they were 30, 40, 50, $60 a pop. It's like, well, probably can't do that every month. But yeah, so there's a few tapes out there that I had that were like, okay, those were just really special. But as far as wrestling now, what do you keep up with nowadays?
I'm still very invested in WWE and AEW. And I do kind of dabble in various indies at any given time. I mean, I'm fortunate to be in Florida, which is sort of a hub for wrestling. It always has been. So there's if indies aren't actually run out of here, they always run shows here. So because of that, I've gotten to see a lot of cool stuff. I've been to NWA shows. I mean, I've watched some
Mhm.
GCW. I'm sure we'll get to it at some point, but I've done some work on the MLW toy line, so I have to keep up with their product because of that.
Sure.
So, I kind of dabble in a little bit of everything. I mean, I will say like there's only so many hours in a day, and I do suffer from a little wrestle fatigue from time to time. But
Mhm.
so I kind of dip in and out, but I keep up with everything to an extent.
Yeah, I've come to that, and first of all, I'm very jealous of all you Florida people because I live in Fargo, North Dakota, and as you can imagine, there's not a ton of wrestling local.
Yeah,
We actually do have a local indie that started up a handful of years ago that actually is really good. They bring in they definitely spend some money to bring some good shows. So like we're really lucky to have them. But outside of that, you're looking at the Minneapolis area, which for me is a 4-hour drive. So it's like I'm not making that drive all the time, but
yeah.
um, for sure. No, yeah, it's with there's so much to watch now too that like I can relate to the fatigue part of it a little bit because it's like you could watch a show even in the US, like pretty much I think there's a show on every night that you could watch, let alone indies or international things too. It's just there's just so much out there.
Yeah, and not to sound like the old guy that's always harping on the good old days, but you really did appreciate it more. Like I think about there was a time when Raw was the only weekly live show and it was 1 hour long, and I'm like, how could you not be wanting more? That's nothing. But then it became two, and then it became three, and then there was a second show, and there's a third show, and a fourth show, and it's like
Yeah.
you could devote your whole life to watching wrestling now.
Yeah, you I mean you definitely could. And I'm married, but I don't have any kids at this point. And so it's like, yeah, I have a full-time job that's pretty demanding. But outside of that, it's like I don't have that many responsibilities in life other than just paying the bills and have a wife and a dog. Outside of that, it's like I don't have time to watch the stuff that I wish I could watch because there's just too much. So it's just like I've had to come to the conclusions like, okay, I can sample lots of different things, but I can't keep up with anything 100%. And it's just not for me. It's just not doable to do that. But it's definitely crazy.
Yeah, in some ways though, my passion for it is higher than ever. I mean, I'm still like everyone, I'm enthralled by the backstage happenings and the inner
Mhm.
machinations of how all this works, you know. And obviously, the longer I've been around it, I've started to know some people in the industry and stuff. So like that whole aspect of it is secondary, and that's kind of fun too. So I always read show reviews and stuff, but it's just that's a lot of time, you know. Like
Yeah, no, I don't think I could not keep up with half of it if it wasn't for like recap podcasts and stuff. So I still want to have an idea. You can listen to that and still have an idea of, what's going on. So I tune in for the next pay-per-view or something, or, trying to watch clips. But yeah, definitely there's a lot out there. But yeah, it's one of those things that just never stops too. So I feel like, okay, if you had to take some time to dip out for a bit, it's like it's always going to be there when you come back, and there's always good things to watch. So it's like when I come back, it's like okay, then I can get excited about it for a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely a grind. There are people out there that watch just about everything. It's just I just don't know how it can be done. All right. So, definitely this is a wrestling centric show, but there definitely is a lot of other things I'd want to ask you about too with all your other projects that you've had working on. So obviously,
sure.
you're an artist in lots of different kind of realms, right? We've got the comics, we've got figure design, we've got wrestling gear, all sorts of different things, obviously, that you've been working on. So I'm someone myself, I have no artistic ability whatsoever. So you'll have to excuse my probably ignorant questions, but I'm
Sure.
assuming for someone like you that's been obviously has been doing all these different things, art came into your life, I'm assuming at an early age.
Yeah, there is for as specific as I could try to be about telling you when my wrestling fandom started. It's the only calling I have ever had in life was to produce art in some capacity. I mean, obviously that's kind of changed a little bit over the years and the application, but like if you had asked me at 4 years old what I wanted to do, I would have said artist, and that's the same thing I would tell you now at 38. So, um, and you know that's come with its upsides and its downs. You know, I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm a little too married to the work. When you know when you're a fan of something and you work in it and it's your whole life, it can be all consuming. I'm sometimes envious of friends that just at 5 o'clock they're checked out of work and that's it. They leave that at the job, because I can't do that. But um, yeah, art has been some day one.
Day one, sure, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. What was the first thing that you like as like a kid that you started to work on for for yourself? Was it just okay, I'm just doing just doodling? Was it like okay, I want to draw comics? Is it like where was that first kind of thought like okay, to have this as like a career? What were you first kind of initially trying to get into?
Um, I don't. I think as a kid, I probably didn't really understand all the applications that art had. So I
Mhm,
think that the obvious one was probably comic books, just because it was like,
mhm,
well, I know a human's drawing this because it says their name on it.
sure.
Um, but I mean, I was sculpting, I was drawing my own comics, I was doing like little sketches in elementary school and selling them to kids for a quarter, like that kind of stuff. So I mean, like
Mhm,
I was entering contests. Like art was always a thing. Like it was never. I don't know that I really had like a this is the for sure path I'm going to go down. I mean, I because even by the time I went to art school and really started to pursue a professional career, I wanted to do comic books, but even at that point, like I already wanted to work in toys and every other, and costume design and everything else you could imagine as an application for art. So I think comics is probably the entry point for it, but I think I would have ultimately been happy wherever it landed.
and again, I'm definitely from the outside of this one too, so you'll have to bear with me. But I definitely am a comics fan as well. This is a wrestling podcast, but the comic books is another one of my I guess passions in life too. Just as a fan, um, from every like interview or any creator that I've ever talked to, it seems like it's such a weird thing where it's like, okay, there's so many different ways to get into comics, but also like you've heard probably the old saying of, okay, when somebody enters into the industry this way, that hole kind of fills up, and then you got to find a different way in.
Yeah.
just it's been such a weird thing that's like, okay, there's never like the same answers. Oh, how we got started in the comic book industry and kind of making things happening for some of the, especially for some of the major companies that you've done work for. So what was your kind of entry point into comics?
So my entry point into comics was that I was finishing my junior year of art school, and everybody was getting internships. And I really, really wanted to intern at Mirage Studios, who at the time owned Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, the company that, well, Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman created them, but Mirage Studios is their company.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, they had just had the 2007 movie had come out. So things were slowing down a little, but like the brand was still very active. And I guess the misnomer about Mirage Studios is that from the outside, it probably looked like a very big company, but in reality, it had probably had like less than 10 employees.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, at the time, to get the to circle back to your answer with my to your question with my long answer, there was a guy that worked there who was their licensing agent, Steve Murphy, and he ran a blog called The Fifth Turtle. And the blog at the time would show all the like upcoming Ninja Turtles products that he was approving, that they were manufacturing, whatever, and he'd kind of give you a little behind the scenes about it. And I guess I should say too, like even though social media existed at this time, it was very different. You know, like I feel like people are a
Sure.
lot easier to find now or more accessible or whatever. So uh, it was very hard to get access to anyone in the industry. Like it's like I would describe it as a closed circle. I mean, to some extent it still is, but especially back then. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I found any living, breathing human that actually worked at a comic publisher, I was like, there we go, you know? So I started communicating with him, and he was very friendly. And you know, I messaged him for probably 6 months straight and kept just pestering. I really want an internship. I really want to intern. And he told me like it's looking pretty good. It's probably going to happen for you.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that point, I was so excited about this and so happy about this that I was like, well, I'm not even going to apply to intern anywhere else. I found where I'm going. And then he told me kind of at the 11th hour, hey man, sorry, bad news, but like, Peter Laird has a daughter that's the same age as you, and she's going to intern here this summer, and we can only take on one
Uh,
intern. So sorry, that's not happening. But
yeah,
as a
and kind
result,
of. I mean, there's no way that you can compare with Peter Laird's daughter. I mean, it's like who are you gonna pick, right? My own daughter, or you know? I
yeah,
mean,
not really, but I totally understood.
yeah.
But he told me like, obviously at that point I'd sent him a ton of my work, and he said, but we'd like to publish you in a Turtles comic. Would that be cool? And I said, no, yeah, it definitely would be. So
Yeah.
that was how I got my very first published comics work. And in my mind, having not even graduated from art school yet, I was like, well, that's it. The door's open. I'm going to work full time in comics now. Didn't exactly work that way. Um, Within a year, Mirage Studios got sold to Viacom/Nickelodeon, and that door was closed. And it was way harder to break into comics than I thought it would be. And it would be a few years before I started getting work again. And that's a whole other kind of long, winding road. But eventually, now here we sit, many years later, and I've worked for pretty much every major comic publisher other than Image.
An Image is one that I remember seeing one of your posts too, that there's a contest going
Yes.
around that. So is that closed, or are you still hoping to win that
Still,
one?
still waiting. We'll
Still
know by the
waiting.
end of February, they say. But
End of
if it
February.
doesn't
Okay.
if it doesn't happen that way, I'll find another way into Image one day, just because I really want to say I did it. But I would love for it to be on that because I'm a big Spawn fan.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, yeah, you've had a very impressive, run in comics to this point too. With going back to kind of wrestling too. I remember I didn't put it together at the time, obviously, but then it's like, okay, as I've recognized more and more of your work too, with the WWE covers too that
Yeah.
that you're working on too. Those, and I don't know what you can confirm or not confirm in that too. There was always so much speculation when those covers were coming out that we're like, okay, is this an indication that we're going to get this figure, or is this just the cover? And so, can you give us any insight into that? You know, whose decision was it for design? Did you have control over that, of like what attire people would be in? How did that kind of come about, and how did that work?
Yes. So for anyone that isn't aware, Boom Studios produced a WWE comic book for 24, 25 issues. I don't remember exactly. This was a few years ago. Um, and at the time, they hired me to draw action figure variant covers. So every month there'd be like a regular, say the A cover, which is just like, a normal comic book style drawing. And then there'd be my cover, which would look like an action figure. Um, So originally, when we started doing those, they dictated to me the characters they wanted, and so the first 3 or 4 of them, if you look different from all the other ones I did. I think that was like Seth Rollins, Triple H. I'm blanking now, but the first 3 or 4 of them you can tell are obviously different. Well, I kind of had the same question you did. I didn't actually know what was happening behind the scenes, so they would tell me this is who we want this month. And so I would say, okay, do you have any particular outfit? No, you can choose. Okay. And so I would do that. And then what I found out later was happening was because of all the mess of licensing stuff with WWE and with Mattel,
Mm-hmm.
I would do it. I would send it to the comic publisher. They would send it to WWE. WWE would send it to Mattel. And so all these boxes are being checked. And I did sort of wonder a little bit like, why are you paying me to draw what is essentially a real product? Like, just take a picture of it, like,
Right.
and so it started to turn into this really big headache. And it really kind of, it really hit like its absolute like peak of frustration when we were doing the Dude Love cover because, and this sort of wraps around, if you go back and listen to the Major Wrestling Figure podcast episodes about Dude Gate, you'll hear my name get mentioned in that because at one point they actually sent me a box of a Mattel Dude Love figure that didn't come out.
Mm-hmm.
They were like, well, it should look more like this, and I'm like, well, how would I know it's supposed to look like that if I didn't even know that existed? No one knows that
Right.
exists, right? And
Yeah.
so there were too many wires getting crossed, and so finally, I don't remember exactly, who figured out what, but we just said, why don't you just create your own look for these, your own packaging, and do what you want with them, and then it will no longer be representative of a Mattel product. It'll be something
Mm-hmm.
totally original to us, and we can kind of circumvent all this headache. And so that's why starting with issue 5, I think, is when I start doing my own thing with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so then what would happen is they would send me lists of talent that were cleared for Legends deals or current guys they wanted. And so for the most part, they would let me choose. Sometimes there'd be like a particular, like, okay, this month somebody's hot, we want to push them, so put them on. But a lot of times they would let me kind of dictate who the character was, and then as long as it was approved, they'd let me pick the outfit too. So what I would try to do is I would try to do characters that didn't actually have figures in that attire.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I could, I would try to beat Mattel to the punch. So, for example, like I literally was at WrestleMania 33 the night the Hardys came back for their surprise return. I was messaging my editor at the time from WrestleMania saying, I want to do the Hardys like right now. Like, because I was like, I knew because comics have a much faster turnaround time. I said, if you
Mm-hmm.
approve this, we could be the first Hardy merchandise on shelves for WWE. And so
Definitely.
that kind of stuff was cool. But like a lot of that stuff is little Easter eggs to myself. So like Mickey James' costume that I did her cover in is wearing an outfit I actually designed for her real ring gear.
Sure.
Some of them like I have a connection to Diamond Dallas Page, so I asked him like, do you want to have a figure in your DDP yoga outfit? Because I know Mattel's never going to make that. So he actually sent me the photo that he's got
Oh,
on the
wow.
packaging of that. So it's just cool little stuff like that. And then sometimes you'd run into these like weird situations where like I don't even still to this day know what it was actually homaging, but Xavier Woods had this outfit that had some kind of unicorn on it, and I just thought it looked really cool, and I knew there wasn't a Mattel figure of it. So I said, let me do this. So I did it, and then they were like, we can't have that logo on there. So it got erased off of the cover because I
Sure.
guess it was too close to some real thing, but I don't know what that thing is. So
I was
there's
looking at that one. I was wondering because I looked at that cover recently and I was like, what is that? I mean, it looks familiar, but I'm like, I don't know what that's from. But
yeah, and I don't know if they were just playing it safe. So there's a
Mhm.
million of those kind of stories with these covers. Like the Zack Ryder one. Obviously, I knew he only got a basic, and so I thought it'd be fun to make an elite of him and include an action figure of himself as an accessory with it, which obviously they did
Yeah.
for real with Super 7 many years later.
Mhm.
Same thing with like a lot of those covers. I was drawing like alternate hands and heads on them, which the elites hadn't even started doing that yet at the time. So I had a lot of fun with them.
There was definitely me. I think there was definitely some inspiration with some of those things that just funny to look back on them at them now and say like, oh yeah, now that the elites they come with alternate hands and heads
Yeah.
and the Super 7 connection. And yeah, I'll be honest, I've been looking on eBay for some of those and I got to track down. I've got a couple on my list that I got to get because I wasn't collecting single issue comics at the time, and So I missed out on some of those, but I was looking, I'm like, I got to get that. Jeff Hardy and the Kurt Angle were two that were
Oh
very
yeah.
much, because those are two of my favorite guys. I was looking at those on eBay recently too. I'm like, I might have to track those down and add that to the collection.
Yeah, I hope that, that those are still well received, and I hope that if any of them haven't been made yet, that Mattel will take inspiration from them, because I was drawing stuff I wanted to own. Like
Yeah.
specifically like that Bobby Heenan and like that 1993 like Monday Night Raw windbreaker with like the Mrs.
Hmm.
Doubtfire disguise or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I need that in my collection for real. So feel
Yeah.
free to pillage ideas from that, Mattel, if
Yeah.
you're
No
listening.
kidding.
Yeah.
No, I'd be happy with that too, because there was, I like I think the King Booker one was also very unique. Like some people, okay, it's not in ring gear, but I'm like, some of those type of figures I really do like. So having something representing that would be pretty cool. Like we've got some in the ring gear, but that's another one I think I might have to add to the list for
Oh
sure.
well, I'll have to look through if I have any extras. I'll help you out.
Hey, appreciate it. Appreciate it. Yeah, and there's some on eBay for, I can't remember which ones I was looking at too, but they're not plentiful. I mean, there's not a ton up there, so I'm gonna have to
Well,
do some more digging.
a lot of those variant covers, if you're not a subscriber at your comic store, like you just don't see a lot of them on the shelf ever.
Mhm.
So some of
Yeah,
them
for
are
sure.
surprising how hard they can be to find down the road.
Yeah, and even like, I mean, I have a pull list at my local shop, and which is helpful because it's like, I don't subscribe to as many titles as some people. Some people I see walking out of there and just have so many books. Like, I spend some money each month, but it's nothing crazy. But even for like this wasn't even variant covers, which they had variant covers for it, but the first issue of Ultimate Spider-Man that was coming out too. And I was reading online, all these places were selling out and this and that, and I was like, shoot, I went to go pick up my books. I'm like, I never asked them to order that for me. So I'm like, well, here we go. I'm gonna be trying to track that down.
Yep.
And my shop, for some reason, they had ordered so many, so there was just big stacks of them everywhere. So I'm like, okay, good, not to worry. But I heard some places were selling out. But
Yeah,
sure.
it's I've gotten in the habit now. I check every single week and order anything that I want, because you just never know. It's not like it used to be. If you don't order it, there's a chance you may never see it.
Yeah, no kidding. Um, so going on from the WWE covers, obviously that has led into, and I'm not sure which one came first as far as, 'cause I can't remember the first year that you designed some gear, but that led into the costume design and ring gear for different wrestlers. How did that come into play for you? That's another thing that I've always wondered. I'm like, okay, how does somebody venture into that like design for ring gear or costume design? So how did that come into play for you?
So that actually, I want to say I had designed. It was pretty close at the timeline, but I want to say I had designed some gear first.
Okay.
So that actually happened because there's a comic book artist, Jill Thompson, who I found out had designed some of Daniel Bryan's gear at the time,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I that was another one of those things where it's like I just you don't know how this happens until you see someone do it, and you're like, oh, it's an epiphany. Like a
Right,
comic
right.
artist did this. So I think when I found that out, that kind of just put it on my radar that, like, well, if another comic artist could do this, surely I can too. And so
Mhm.
I just started kind of trying to find contacts and sniffing around, and eventually I found Rick Michaels, who runs Global Wrestleware,
Mhm.
and I had reached out to a few different gear makers and just kind of inquired with my interest and said, look, like I design toys, I work in comics, I'm already doing a little WWE stuff, I'm a lifelong fan. Like, I think I'd be really good at this. If you ever, want to take a shot at doing something with me, let me know.
Mhm.
And maybe my timing was just good with Rick or something, because I guess it was like Mania season and he was kind of bogged down or whatever. But Billy Kay at the time needed new gear, and so I designed something for her. He ended up getting it made, and then it was just kind of pretty quickly from there. Just kind of one thing rolled into the next. From there, I did Sami Zayn's, and then it was just a word of mouth thing. You'd start getting people, and then they would repeat. So I would, I think I did like, I think 3 designs of Sammy's that came out, and
Mhm.
then did a couple for Billy, and then it just started to be one thing after another. Then other gear makers started reaching out, other wrestlers started reaching out, and then it was like, did a bunch for Mansoor, a bunch for Johnny Gargano, Aiden English. uh, and Giselle Shaw. There's been a bunch, but like it was all just kind of just rolled out of that one thing. It happened very organically. Once you get the ball rolling, it was surprising how quickly they would come to you.
Sure. No, definitely. It's I mean, I don't maybe you don't feel the pressure, but I feel like situations like that, they have to there has to be a lot of pressure there too, because like some in some ways you feel like, oh, I have one shot at this. If this doesn't work out so well, do I ever have a shot again? I don't know. Did you ever experience that?
Yeah, certainly. I think,
Mhm.
but that I think the thing maybe that makes me feel a little better about that no one is seeing is that for every one finished design you're seeing, there was probably anywhere from like 10 to 50 concepts that were sent to the
Mhm.
talent. So, and
Mhm.
sometimes, like in the case like Sonia Deville, I did some stuff for, and it was like, well, I like a piece from that and a piece from this and a piece from that, and you put them together. Oh, I don't like the way they look together,
Yep.
and so it's like you just keep swirling the pot, and eventually it's like you land on stuff that works. But so I think that you go through so much of that by the time you land on the final design, you're like, well, they've got to be thrilled with it because like there's no options left that we haven't explored. So
Definitely.
I
Definitely.
I think that's a big part of it. I don't know, for whatever reason though. I think because I am such a visual thinker that, and I've watched so much wrestling in my life, and I kind of love the theatrical aspect of it. I love big like mania entrances and like looking cool, and also obviously a lifetime of comic books and toys and every other influence sphere. For some reason, I've always said this, like when it comes to like drawing comics or whatever, I would not describe myself as a very confident mark maker. Like there's some people that they could just, you hand them a paper and in 10 seconds they whip out this awesome sketch.
Mhm.
I've never been one of those. I'm like erase, redraw, overthink, make myself crazy. When it comes to costume design, for whatever reason, I feel totally zen about it. I'm never worried about it. I can just spit out ideas, and if they don't work, I just try some more. Like I for whatever reason, that one's always just come very naturally.
Yeah, that's something for myself not being an artist too. It just like every time I talk to anyone that has any sort of artistic talent, it always just like, wow, I just the way that people have to think differently than I'm used to thinking is that's just not like just a whole different way of looking at things.
I think when you've taken in enough inspiration, and obviously I've
Mhm.
spent my whole life absorbing pop culture,
Mhm.
it's like an endless idea well. And especially because I think wrestling is so cyclical and kind of regurgitates a lot of its own ideas anyway.
Mhm.
If you go back 20, 30 years, and there's so many cool things that you can kind of steal from or expand on, like, and they do this to themselves, like,
Mhm.
Waylon Mercy begats Bray Wyatt. You know what I mean? And 20
Right.
years from now,
Yep.
you'll probably have somebody else in a Hawaiian shirt. Like, I think
Yep.
that's just how it goes. So it's like, for that reason, I think because I'm so aware of the history of wrestling, I kind of know things that can be maybe dusted off or reworked or something, and that kind of always helps my thinking a little bit too.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely is an advantage at that point if you are such a fan yourself too. It's like okay, you kind of know what's been done and what can be reused. I wanted to ask you about Johnny's gear in particular too. For me, that those are always gear sets that always stood out to me too. Obviously, with the colors and the comic book influence that some of those have too. And I'm hoping that you have some of those figures that have been made
All
from
of
those gears. Okay, I was gonna say, I'm like, I hope that because sometimes people are like, oh, I don't really, don't care about stuff I've done. I'm like, that would be like
Oh,
the
no way.
coolest thing. That'd be so cool to like, okay, I put so much work, I designed this, it's been made. What was it like working with Johnny? I'm back and forth on some gear.
Oh, well, awesome is the short answer to that. But as far as owning toys of this stuff, though, I got to tell you real quick. Like, part of the reason I love that stuff so much is because as a toy designer myself, I have designed a lot of toys based on other people's things,
Mhm.
other IP, other pop culture, other brands, properties, whatever. I've never, and I've done a lot of work for like NECA, Boss Fight Studio, Super Seven, Hasbro. I've never actually worked for Mattel, even though I'm friends with a lot of the guys there. But what's funny about that is Mattel has actually, well, and now also like Major Bendy's and Zombie Sailor and stuff, but
Mhm.
Mattel specifically has made a lot of, and Micro Brawlers, Mattel has made a lot of figures of my designs on figures. And so it's kind of like, in a way, that's like the ultimate tribute to me because it's like
Yep.
a toy company that I haven't worked for is homaging my work, and I
Yeah.
realize
Yeah.
that's not really what they're doing. They're making a figure of a wrestler. But in my mind, it's like, how cool is it that as somebody who's had to reinterpret other people's designs into action figures, someone's actually doing that with my designs now. So like,
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, and I own at least two of every design I've ever had of a wrestler that's been turned into a toy. But as far as the Johnny costumes go, that was kind of another interesting connection and stuff. How that even came to be. I was a guest at MegaCon, which is a
Mhm.
huge convention in Orlando every year, like a pop culture, and they were filming an episode of Up Up Down Down there, and
Okay.
so uh, Johnny, Candace, Mike Rome, there might have been somebody else with them, but I don't know. They were going around and they were filming at the show. And anyway, I recognized them, and they came to my booth to film because at the time I was working on the WWE Boom Studios comic, and so they
Mhm.
wanted to talk to me about that. And then while that was happening, I guess I want to say Johnny had just started doing the Marvel inspired gear. Like he'd just
Mhm.
done maybe like one or two takeovers with it.
Mhm.
And I told him at that time, I was like, dude, you and I got to talk because, like, obviously we're very simpatico in this regard. Like, we're both, wrestling nerds, we're both comic nerds. Like, we could really make magic happen.
Right, right.
And he was like, oh, yeah, man, definitely for sure. I'll hit you up. And I was like, yeah, whatever. This is like, yeah, your people will talk to my people kind of thing. I never thought anything would
Mhm.
come of it. But
Mhm.
in those moments, I don't tend to hold back on opportunities like that. And so anyway, sure enough, maybe a couple of weeks later, he sent me a message on Twitter and was like, hey, got an idea. You want to work on something with me? And I said, yeah, sure. And then that kind of just rolled from there. And now I'm friendly with both him and Candace, and I've done I didn't even know how many sets of gear for him, but so many of his iconic moments, winning the NXT title and reuniting DIY and all that stuff. Those were all me, and obviously a lot of cool toys as a result. So it was a really good partnership.
Yeah, for sure. And he's one of those guys. Obviously, I don't know him myself personally, but he just always comes across as such a genuine guy too. That it's just like you just you have no choice but to root for him.
Yeah, I think he's and I wouldn't say this about everyone, but I will say with him, I think he is very much what you see. I think he really is a genuine fan, and I think that when he meets fans and stuff, like he knows where they're coming from because he was one, and so I think he
Yep,
really respects and appreciates his fans.
definitely, definitely. So, and we're kind of jumping around here a bit too. And you talked about
Sure.
how um, different toy companies were taking your designs that people have worn for gear too. And then you mentioned obviously working for all those different companies with toy design for yourself too. How did again, I keep asking the same question because you're
It's
involved in
okay.
so many different things, but how did you get into the toy design or concept art for toys into that realm?
um, man, that's actually kind of tough to even remember myself at this point. I so before I even went to art school, I was like early mid 2000s. I think I found one of the guys that had worked on GI Joe in the 80s and 90s, Mark Pennington. It turned out that he didn't live terribly far from me,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think I sent him a cold message through his website or whatever. I think maybe I found his signature on a piece of GI Joe concept art from the 80s or something. It was some convoluted, but anyway, he was very nice and he said give me a call. And so I called him, and at the time he was also he and still does work in comics. Um and so I had a really nice conversation with him, and he kind of gave me a lot of insight about it. Shortly thereafter, I went to Ringling College of Art and Design, and then I think from there it was just networking. Like I met alumni
Mm-hmm.
that were already in toy design. I interviewed with some companies, and I'm a massive, massive GI Joe fan. Like my two biggest fandoms by far are wrestling and GI Joe,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think I really had it in my head. I'm going to work on GI Joe when I get out of here. Like that was because that one wrestling and comic books and all this stuff I was very unsure of. But GI Joe was very cut and dry to me. It's like you work for Hasbro, you go to this toy company, you work
Yeah,
there nine to
right.
five, you make toys. That was
Mm-hmm.
very easy for me to understand. So um, I think it was just a lot of pestering the right people. I kept interviewing, I kept cold calling and emailing, and eventually the GI Joe convention or the Transformers convention or something was drivable. I think it was like in Orlando,
Mm-hmm.
and I got to meet all these people from Hasbro, and we exchanged contact info, and I gave them my portfolio, and um, kind of just started from there. I started illustrating packaging art for GI Joe, and I think I've done close to 100 GI Joe related projects at this point. Um, but then from that, it just kind of spawned into other things. Like I started to, because everything is interconnected to some degree, even the things that
Yeah.
you wouldn't think are. So like, I
Hmm.
knew guys that worked on GI Joe at Hasbro. They left Hasbro. They started their own toy company, Boss Fight Studio. We had already worked together previously on GI Joe, so they knew me. They knew my interest in wanting to get into the design stuff. They started using me for designs. I started parlaying that work into other companies. So then I started working for NECA, and so it's like, honestly, in some ways, I've thought about this a lot myself. Like, if you told me, okay, we're gonna push rewind on your life, get back to the point you're at now, I didn't even know that I could. It was such a there's so much luck, there's so much happenstance, there's so many
Hmm.
connections and networking, and like I know
Hmm.
the broad strokes it takes, and I still have a lot of career ambitions and aspirations, but I don't sweat so much how I'm gonna get there, because I just know eventually it'll just happen, because that's just what happens. You just know
Right.
one
Right.
person, you start talking to them, and especially because anything in the sort of what I'll call the creative industry, and I would even include wrestling in that.
Hmm.
I think that there's so much mutual respect and admiration for what we all do. There's obviously like Matt Cardona and Brian Myers are big toy nerds, and obviously they have a lot of interest and respect for people in the toy industry, much in the same way that I have for professional wrestlers.
Right.
So I
Right.
think that when you start to know somebody in one field, it's just one thing leads to another. Like, um, through Johnny Gargano, I met someone that worked at Marvel Studios, because they were fans of his because of what he was doing, which I was designing, So it's like
Right. Right.
it's all such a big sphere of influence, I guess, that it's like if you start to know the right people, somehow everyone's connected to everyone. And I mean, if I could give anyone any kind of like career advice, art related or not, I think it would just be to always be open and receptive to opportunities like that,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
I feel
That's.
like people are
Oh,
too
go ahead.
shy is the short answer. Like
Yeah,
just put
for
yourself out
sure.
there, ask a lot of questions.
For sure. I think like you've got to fail so many times at things before you get it right too. It's just like I think most people are, yeah, like they're scared to put themselves out there and get rejected, or just knowing ways to kind of channel like whatever gifts that they do have, or I think just like anything else, it takes practice too. But um, yeah, I think I just don't think like that's such a rare thing. Like you said earlier in the interview, like okay, I grew up wanting to be an artist of something, right? And just how rare that is, where it's like I have this dream as a kid, and then actually fulfilling that dream and becoming that as an adult too. That's just such a rare thing, I think, for most people.
I
Just
think
the
part
concept
of
they can't even get behind for sure.
Yeah, I think a big part of that is just being relentless in your pursuit of it,
Hmm.
though. You can't give up, and I say that as someone that's been somewhat privileged with that opportunity, though, because also I have to say, like, my mom helped to put me through art school. Like, I had people in my corner that wanted me to succeed. I was able to live at
Hmm.
home for a while and save money, and so like you had to do things to make that happen. I don't want to sound like I'm oblivious to the fact that not everyone has the opportunity to
Hmm.
pursue things. If you have a kid really young or something, you have responsibilities that
Hmm.
supersede. But on that same token, I will say I've made a lot of sacrifices to get where I am too, because there's a lot of fun I've skipped out on to pursue this in the way that I have. So, but I think if you want anything bad enough in life, career wise, like just don't take no for an answer. Like, it's like
Hmm.
I can't even tell you, for every one big visible success, there's probably 100 rejections, and you just develop thicker and thicker skin each time.
Hmm.
I mean, there was times when I was so deathly afraid to even ask for something I wanted in an email, and in hindsight, I'm like, who cares? What's the worst that's gonna happen? They ignore me, like next. Like, so you just keep
Yep.
trying and trying and trying. Like,
Yep. For sure. No, it's one of those things too that it's just even for myself, and this is obviously just from a small podcast. This is just for fun too, but it's like just yeah, like it's gotten to the point where now it's like and it's easier now than what it was when I first started it. I'm still in my first year, but it's like it's getting easier as more people say yes to do it. Then it's like okay, you at least have something to show for what you've done to know like okay, I'm going to get on here, and it's, at least this is going to be a legitimate thing that will get published and put out there. But it's like there's so many emails I've sent that have been either a no or just like you don't get a response. And it's just like after a while, it's like that doesn't really bother you. Like right away, it's like, oh, like I feel kind of bad about that. Like I hope I didn't do something wrong. But then it's just like, no, it's just kind of the way it goes. You just have to put yourself out there.
yeah, it's funny. Like when I think back to, I almost like cringe at myself at how thin skinned there. There was a time that I was where like even even like public speaking. I mean, I would be up like all night, like jittery, like, oh my God, I'm going to have to actually do this. I'm going to throw up, and now I'm talking in front of a room of thousands of people. It doesn't even faze me. Like, so yeah, there really is something to be said for just you build up that callus from just over and over and over, just trying, getting rejected, hearing yes, hearing no, hearing everything in between, and you just keep moving. Like that's all you can do.
Sure. No, I can see like the day-to-day grind of I think really for people that, again, I'm not putting myself in this category obviously, like I have the traditional probably 9 to 5 job that is pretty structured hours. I have some flexibility, but for the job of what an artist does, and just like, okay, you have deadlines, yes, but it's all kind of on you, right? Just like it is such a different schedule I can imagine than like you said, you have friends that you're maybe jealous of that work 9 to 5, they can
Yeah.
leave things at work, where it's just like I can imagine that it's just an all encompassing thing, which probably is hard because some people will look at your life and be like, wow, you should be thankful for the stuff that you get to do. But also it's like I think people often don't see the other side of it, where it's like, okay, this is a all the time job in a lot of ways, I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's not uncommon at all to find me still working at 3, 4, 5 in the morning if that's what the job requires, because at the end of the day, they want it done and they want it done now, and that's it. Like there is
Sure.
no option. Like this isn't like we'll address it on Monday after the weekend. It's like if you don't do this, we're gonna miss the production deadline. So
Yeah, right. And that affects getting at probably the next job and just everything else. So it's yeah, it's I my perspective has changed the more that I've talked to people that create anything. It's just like, yeah, you don't when you have a regular job, like for what I do, I work as a speech language pathologist, so I see patients all day and they're stressed with that. And as far as like I have paperwork deadlines I have to hit, and so there's deadlines, so they're stressed with it too. But like for the most part, I have to do some work on the weekends to catch up on all of my like treatment notes and stuff, but it's not the right for the most part. When I'm home, I'm home. When I'm there, I'm there. And it's just there's not that in between of like, okay, when I'm home, I'm needing to think about work or things like that. So I can leave most of it there. But as for what you do, it's just that never ending grind. I think you have to be wired in a certain way that you can be able to handle that. I think there are some people out there that would not be able to keep up with that.
yeah, and I mean, I won't lie and say that that's always easy. I mean, there are
Mhm.
times where I'm like, God, I would give anything to get up from this
Yeah.
chair right now. Like,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
um, I think to some extent it's all I know. Like, I think
Mhm.
I've done it for so long and I'm so conditioned to it that it's hard to imagine my life looking different.
Mhm. Definitely. Well, Adam, you've been very generous with your time. I won't keep you any longer, too. But before we get out of here, too, where can people go to check out some of your work to support you? Where can do you have any websites? I know you have a website for where a lot of your work is, but where can people find your website, but also social media? Anything that you want to plug here at the end?
Sure. So my website is adamriches.com. That's easy. Then it gets a little more complicated because there is another artist also named Adam Riches in England that's not me that does a very different looking style. So you'll know which is which.
Right.
But so I think on Twitter/X it is at Adam Riches Art.
Mhm.
Uh, Instagram I barely ever use, but just look for Adam Riches. You'll see me.
Mhm.
Um, and Facebook is the Art of Adam Riches. But
Sure.
yeah, I'm everywhere. I'm very accessible. I love interacting with people. If you have any follow up questions that you're dying to know from this, if you want to know how I broke into something, how I'm still staying afloat in something, feel free to ask. I'm always happy to help other artists or just people that have burning curiosity with anything that I'm legally allowed to answer.
Sure. Sure. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you again very much for taking the time. I'd be happy to have you on anytime if you ever have something that you want to plug or that's coming out going forward too. Love to have you on, or just if it's just to chat more wrestling at some point too, we'd love to have you back.
Awesome, Matthew, man. It's been great, and I'd be happy to be back whenever.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.